In the first podcast, we explored the concept of the soul, its purpose, and that you as a personality have a threefold nature, which, as you remember, consists of the mental nature, the emotional, the feeling nature, and our physical body with sensations. I also described the divine plan, the hierarchy or the masters, and a definition of what I'm using as called the Ageless Wisdom. We will go into further detail of the nature of the threefold nature when I begin to have a description of a more detailed description of the human constitution in podcast 3, the one following this one. In this podcast, just as in podcast 1, I am providing preliminary background information on our greater spiritual purpose as souls, which is to initiate a process of integration of the personality with the soul, so that you as a person, which you will go into meditation later, which is the tool we'll use, main tool for doing that, we'll use meditation as the instrument for connecting with the soul and eventually merging with it so that you become one with the soul. This is an important step in making the connection with the divine, as I discussed earlier. It is not enough just to meditate and devote your life to a spiritual practice or even seek at-one-ment, becoming one with your greater self. While you're in this process of integrating the lesser self with the soul, you will come to see yourself differently, and your capacity for understanding and going within will deepen. But having knowledge about the dynamics of the self, that is, your personality, integrating with the self, the higher self, the soul, can be valuable for progressing in your spiritual work. So let's explore a brief description of the various stages of transformation that you will be going through. And in future podcasts, I'll be revisiting these in greater detail. So we'll call these the stages of integration, and this is just an overview. So this is a relatively short description of each of the different major sections or parts of your transformation you go through in your spiritual journey. So let's think of two circles. Two circles. One is the personality, your personality, and the other is the soul. Throughout numerous incarnations, this personality circle stays separate and largely unconscious of the soul. Then comes a life when the soul wishes to bring the personality into an at-one-ment, bringing it together as one. Hence, the merging process ensues. At this time, the two circles begin to overlap and blend, especially during the probationary and discipleship phases. A final integration culminates during initiation. So here we have new terms here, probationary and discipleship and initiation. I will define all these terms in a future podcast. A high-level understanding of the integration process can be described in the following stages. We have the stage called alignment. The spiritual seeker follows a prescribed idea of connecting with the soul through meditation. The soul responds via impression, and the individual begins the alignment of the lower three vehicles. We're going to use the term vehicle, we're going to use the term body interchangeably. So you have a mental body, that's the mental thinking capacity you have, of course, which is basically the higher mind is the soul, and the lower mind is called the concrete mind. I'll get into those in podcast 3, the details of those. You have your emotional nature, your feeling nature, and then you have your physical-etheric nature. We'll define what etheric means in a little bit. Alignment is bringing all three vehicles into a realized oneness. So you're becoming one. This will take months and possibly years. I'm still working on it myself, and I've been working on it for 40 years. But I've largely have a concept acquired in myself of seeing myself as I don't have separate emotions or separate thinking or separate sensations. This is all part of my one being, which has a sensation of hearing or feeling or taste, or I have a sense of emotion or thinking capacity. I'm just one being doing this, and I'm not separate from these other parts of myself. So, like I said, the alignment is bringing all three vehicles into a realized oneness, and the individual, the spiritual seeker, then seeks a greater alignment of the threefold personality and creates an at-one-ment with the soul. I'm going to use the term at-one-ment many times in these talks because it refers very strongly, says, I am merging and at-one-ment. I'm bringing together as one. And this is bringing the personality and soul together as one. This is a major goal that you have, a spiritual goal. There's the stage of light. There's a stage of light coming into your head. You, the individual, will enter a phase of light and awareness where you clearly see the next steps for you to take. And you will realize you're passing through process of reorientation. A little later in this podcast, I'll give you a little bit more description about light, the concept of light in the esoteric and spiritual realm. Then there's the next stage you have of crisis. Now, these stages can all overlap, incidentally, too. They're not like one comes after the other. No, they can be totally overlapping with each other. Crisis, during an alignment process, the subtle energies of the soul will create a crisis in the personality. Because remember, it is the soul that wants to merge with the personality. And in your awakening process, it is you, the personality, who wants to merge with that soul. So you want to merge with this natural part of yourself. The soul is the natural part of yourself. The crisis, we're talking about crisis, it's in the form of purification, where anything that is not of the soul, such as anger and hate, overreaching desire, selfishness, greed, etc., must be brought under control. For the spiritually conscious individual crisis is not a disaster, but an opportunity for removing all hindrances and obstacles that block soul contact. And we will talk about this in a dedicated podcast when we talk about the observer and going within with the process of meditation. Another stage you'll go through is what is called revelation. With an established alignment with the soul and a purging of obstacles, the individual seeker is open to a sense of revelation of the plan and his potential connection with the soul. Now, remember what we talked about the plan. It's like a blueprint that the masters, like the Buddha and the Christ, are holding in their consciousness. They exist on the planet. They just don't exist in physical form anymore. But they hold a consciousness of how this great cosmic and spiritual or God's plan is manifesting here on this planet. There's another stage you go through called integration. And this is the process of fully integrating the three vehicles, mental, emotional, physical, into a relational whole with the soul. So merging once again. It marks a time of fusion whereby the conscious thinker, you become conscious of the process, and when you're doing this, there's techniques that can help facilitate this, which we'll talk about as we go along. The conscious thinker comes to an awareness that integration is both desirable and can be achieved. He wants to contribute and not acquire. Deep levels of integration will progressively occur in the family unit, the nation, and the social order of humanity. This person can function as a world server. Well, we're talking about there's the concept of alignment, and then there's the merging, there's the threefold process that you're getting together and merging with the soul. But this integration we're talking about here is a more intermediate to advanced level, where you're relating your individuality with the whole. And we see this already in great leaders, people that are like Martin Luther King, for example, or Mother Teresa, or even Princess Diana. All of these people had the capacity. You may call it a form of charisma, but what they did, they brought people together, and they had a sense of taking their spiritual qualities of their consciousness, their expression of self, and showing other people. And other people says, wow, that's something I want to do. They don't say it out loud, but that's what they feel and that's what they think. And so therefore they are attracted to these people and wanting to be like them. And so they want to, and everything that Mother Teresa and Dalai Lama, Martin Luther King, and Mother and Princess Diana was about service. It was about giving, freely giving of themselves. So this is becoming a world server, and I'm going to be talking about the concept of a world server in future talks. So from this, the integration process is both sensed in the physical nature, but it also becomes an attitude of mind, a reorientation, a shift in the consciousness. So the spiritual man realizes his relational part with the whole. Right, come on. So in this process, this more advanced process, his sense, her sense, is basically there's an integration on such a level of which you'll be wanting to integrate greater with the social order of humanity and influence humanity and function as a world server. For the individual who's wakened in this manner, he has taken a major step on the path of return. Now, when we talk about the path of return, we're talking about returning to our natural spiritual self. Totally different than the separated self, of course. We're going to be merging, bringing together, see ourselves as whole, and then we come back to our spiritual self. The stages of integration will be discussed in greater detail when I talk about building toward integration. This will be coming in a future podcast when we're talking about the deeper integration process. So let's now change a little bit, and let's talk about light and illumination that I alluded to before. I've mentioned light, such as light of the soul. And speaking from a spiritual viewpoint, we understand that light is indicative of how much soul dominance exists in the personality. And we use light here esoterically and spiritually. We're not talking about the light bulb and the light that comes from the light bulb or something. So this is strictly spiritual light we're talking about. In the early stages, man's sense of the soul's light was dim. Initially, he was aware of the physical light of the sun for seeing and for warmth. He learned to use artificial light to illuminate areas where there was darkness, and thereby allowing for the light of the knowledge to work out. And, during the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, Renaissance, forward, man was reading with candlelight. Later, man became unconsciously attracted to other subtle forms of light. As he expanded his awareness, he became aware of the light in his mind. His recognitions have evolved through 4 main sources of light. So we have the light of instinct. Instinct is associated with the animal stage prior to reasoning and thinking, more of a gut level understanding of something. Then there's the light of knowledge, and this relates to educating the everyday person to allow him to become consciously aware, such as what we have in schooling. Knowledge is a product of the concrete mind, and as an impulse, it brings light of understanding to areas of consciousness that are in darkness. So this type of light has dispelled glamours or illusions in our emotional self through the light of mind. And we have the light of wisdom. This is the light of the soul. It is the sum total of learned experiences combined with knowledge. This light of the soul involves illumination of subjective realms of meaning or reality to propel the spiritual seeker on the path of light and expanded awareness. So basically, when you get into meditation and you get into a really quiet space, and you sense the soul, you're basically sensing the light of the soul. And the light is not, it could actually be a light that illuminates, where you actually see and there's a greater, the darkness is illuminated. That is totally possible. I've had this happen myself. But we're basically talking about, like in meditation, when you connect with the soul and feel that spiritual presence, you're basically feeling the light of the soul, which is composed of wisdom, consciousness, and your life energy, vitality. And finally, there's the light. There's the light of intuition. When the spiritual worker begins to build a bridge between the personality and the soul, esoterically, there's a Sanskrit term called the antakarana. We'll talk also in detail about this another time. But anyhow, it's for using to connect the abstract mind, which is a part of the soul's mind, with the concrete mind. So you're basically, with the light of the intuition, what you want to do is in meditation, you as the spiritual seeker want to be quiet, and you want to allow that soul's light to open up. Not that you're going to be necessarily conscious of all these stages, but just be present with the soul's energy, and you will naturally over time open a space, a pathway to a higher plane known as the Buddhic plane, and from there you will be able to let flow the intuition and pure reason. So this indicates there's a blending of soul light with that of the monad. Remember, the monad is our pure spirit, and reveals to him that life of divinity. So basically, on your when you become conscious on the path of return, you're conscious of your own spiritual development. That's the path of return that you're on. And you will be nearing toward the end of your spiritual journey. You will be going on journeys of discipleship, advanced discipleship, where you're working in your consciousness, you're transforming all sorts of parts of yourself, and you're connecting naturally with the higher planes, which is one called the Buddhic plane, and then of course you're ultimately going to be connected with the monad, and then at one with the monad. And at the monadic level, you are basically aware of the divine nature in your consciousness. There is also something called the light in the head. Specifically, the light in the head, or illumination, refers to an interplay between the soul, the spiritual mind, the personality, or spiritual man, the personality, and the lesser threefold nature. So when this occurs, the light of the soul, force, energy, allows the individual to combine instinct, intellect, and intuition through the will in connecting with your own spiritual evolution. So basically, like I said, in meditation, you get into a quiet space. We'll talk about this when we talk about meditation and becoming the observer. But you're basically allowing that light in the head to merge, combining your sense of instinct, intellect, and intuition, and your sense of will. The will, what your personality wants to do, your entire desire nature, for example. The light in the head is indicative of several factors. Upon the first soul contact, the pineal gland, which is a gland which is in your, it's just between your eyebrows. It's a tiny little pea-shaped gland. The head is stimulated into activity. Now, you're not necessarily going to be conscious of this, but this is what happens over time. The pineal gland will become stimulated. An established contact can be through meditation, as I mentioned, mental control of thoughts and feelings, and allowing an inflow of spiritual force from the soul to condition your personality and your threefold nature. So basically, once again, you're just allowing the soul's nature to come into your consciousness and permeate your body. You will get to a point in consciousness, in meditation, where you're aware of the soul's energy coming through you, like a warm, inviting, friendly, extremely friendly energy which comes flowing into you. It's a warming sensation, and it fills your body. It stimulates your etheric body, your chakra system. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about during the Constitution of Man in the next podcast. So, light in the head is also indicative of alignment of your lesser mind, your feelings and desires on the physical plane. This eventually allows the physical plane life to be brought under control of the soul. So again, you're in meditation, you create an alignment. You're going to learn how to create an alignment. We'll talk about this in much more detail in the future podcast. Alignment of your mental, emotional, and physical nature. These are not impossible things to do, but they will take time and they will take understanding and patience to put this together. You will, with the light in the head, once again, we're talking about the light in the head. We're talking about the downflow of spiritual force, that is from the soul, into the mind. This enables spiritual vision. You can have vision from this. You can have correct perception and right contact with your higher self, that is. And this downflow is indicative of the stream of illumination into the brain. So you're sensitive. This is what we're talking about is a level of consciousness which is not in the brain. The brain is the physical capacity for thinking process and cognition in us, but the higher thinking process, like through the abstract mind and higher into the soul's nature, that becomes the higher mind that we're talking about here, and the light in the head which can ensue as a result of this soul contact. The soul, the light in the head, can also help finding the path, getting more defined with the path, or getting a greater sense of the path. The spiritual seeker he or she should study and acquire an understanding about how light is centralized, intensified, and entered. This we'll be talking about with spiritual study. We'll be talking about this also in a future podcast. So it is recommended that the light should be followed back until its source of the lower manifestation is reached and the soul consciousness is entered. So it's becoming conscious of the light and the source of this light. If you can possibly be quiet enough within yourself and sense where this light is emanating from within your consciousness. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit here and give you another term that I've been using from the physical plane. It's actually known as the cosmic physical plane. And this is basically the physical earth we have, and there's different planes of consciousness, which I'll articulate here in just a moment. So we understand that the cosmos consists of many levels of vibrational frequency or planes, most of which are invisible to the human being. Upon these planes exist many beings at different levels of evolution, such as, for example, the kingdom of souls, the masters I talk about. They exist on a higher plane than us, basically on the Buddhic plane, which I'll talk about shortly. We have the human kingdom. Human kingdom largely exists on, it largely exists on about the lower three planes, which is the mental plane, the emotional plane, and the physical plane. And then we have the animal kingdom, which basically exists on the emotional and the physical plane. And then you have the plant kingdom, which can also have emotional energy too and physical plane characteristics. So we have different planes of consciousness and different beings that exist on different planes. Now for man, for the conscious individual, a long-term goal is to ultimately become a master of the wisdom, where he has complete conscious awareness on all 7 planes. Now, this is the 7 planes I'll talk about shortly, what they actually are called. The difference between one plane and another is the lower planes, which is planes 5 through 7. I'm referring to a chart, which as Blavatsky defined back in 1888. So it's difficult to concept, but to visualize when you're just listening to this. But please bear with me here. The lower planes are denser and objective. This is where we live. And the physical animal kingdom and the human kingdom, we live on the lower planes, and because they're denser in vibration. Whereas on the higher planes, which is they are internal, they are formless and subjective. These are major concepts to grasp, that when you go into meditation, for example, you're basically working in a subjective reality. It is not, there is a physicality to it on a certain level. Vibrationally, the matter and the energy of your consciousness, your thoughts and your feelings, they do have a vibrational frequency which can be measured ultimately, eventually, with the right technology, which hasn't been defined yet, but it will in the future. But anyhow, the dense sensations that we have, the physical 5 sensations we have with the physical body, those are registered in the lower planes. So the cosmic physical plane is the lowest of the most and the most dense of the 7 cosmic planes. And there's a cosmic emotional plane, there's a cosmic mental plane, and so on. It goes, and there's 7 total cosmic planes, which are much higher levels of consciousness than we can embrace right at the moment. The cosmic physical plane encompasses 7 planes of human experience, each with its own 7 subplanes, which we will not get into, and each with finer differentiations of different levels of awareness. So for all intents and purposes, we're just going to be talking about the 7 major planes. And the 7 major planes are called, from the very highest, from the cosmic physical plane, from the very highest, is called the logoic, or realm of the planetary logos. The planetary logos is our planet. In this ageless wisdom, in this esoteric understanding, we understand that life exists on many different levels. It exists in the physical form. There's an emotional or an intuitive or a Buddhic plane capacity to life. But anyhow, on the planetary logos level, the highest of our cosmic physical plane, that's where the planet Earth exists, and it has its own consciousness, and it's going through its own evolution. The next plane down is the plane of the monad, our pure spirit. Below that is the spirit or Atma. These are Sanskrit terms. The next plane down below that, plane number 4, is the intuitive or Buddhic plane. And the plane below that is the mental plane, where we have access to. It's called Manas, and on that plane is located the soul, the abstract mind, and just slightly below that Manas is our personality with our concrete mind. And below that, the plane number 6, is the astral or emotional plane, where we have our feeling nature. And then the lowest plane we have is the most dense, known as the etheric or physical. Now, I provided a little bit of definition for the lower 3 planes, which is basically your physical, your emotional, and then your mental plane. But now we want to talk about the planes, that the soul's plane and above, which is called the spiritual triad. And that basically talks about the plane of Atma, the plane of Buddhi, or a Buddhic plane, and then the mental plane, or Manas, or Manasic. The spiritual triad is often referred to as the higher mind and constitutes the spiritual man in incarnation. Now, remember I talked about in podcast 1, I talked about how the monad desires for full comprehension and experience of what the physical plane existence is like. So it manifested long time ago, and it created a soul. It created our soul, the individual soul, and the soul is empowered with the life energy, a life thread called the Sutratma, Sanskrit term, and that life thread is given from the monad to the soul, and it gives us life. And from the soul, we also have the capacity for consciousness, and we also have the expression, or we have the capacity for intelligence or creative activity. These will be discussed in greater detail in future podcasts. So the spiritual triad like I say, is the higher mind, and it constitutes the spiritual man in incarnation. This is our goal initially, is to unite and connect with this spiritual triad. It is the higher correspondence of our consciousness. It acts as a guidepost for the soul and for disciples and initiates. Now, disciples are people that are much more conscious on the path. They are much more aligned. They work with meditation, understanding, and be able to, in their consciousness, they're able to connect with their deep natural self, the soul, and higher nature very easily. So these people will be called disciples. People that are called initiates, which I will talk about in detail too, future podcast, they work with something called initiation, which is a rare occurrence, which is a major transformation in consciousness, where you're able to bridge the higher planes and be able to get understanding from those higher planes and expand your level of awareness and consciousness. So you have your Atma, your spiritual will, the Atmic plane. You have the Buddhi, or the Buddhic plane, and that represents spiritual love and wisdom at a pure level. And Buddhi is made up of the pure love and intuition, pure reason, and is the carrier of formless ideas. So when you're wanting to get access to thinking out of the box, as we have the expression in our life, when we're thinking out of the box, we're basically connecting with our higher Buddhic nature. You may not be doing it for very long, and you just got this idea, this great idea, or your boss tells you at work, simply says, I need you to figure this out. Go into the other room and work together as a team. And if you have to, think out of the box, figure it out, whatever. So you're working with intuitive ideas. And the plane, the highest plane of the soul, which is the lowest point of the spiritual triad, is called the higher mind. It's manas. Manas means mind. It's Sanskrit. And it refers to the higher part of our mental plane. So we have Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. These are all Sanskrit terms, as I said. And I'll be using these interchangeably over the podcast going forward. And these are life-giving energies transmitted directly from the monad, and they are available when the disciple or even spiritual seeker is evolved enough to receive them. The monad transmits these energies, the Atma, Buddhi, and the Manas, to the soul through what is known as the life and consciousness threads to the lower three worlds where we exist. So I mentioned that before. So it is important to know that the personality, when integrated, cannot directly contact the monad, pure spirit, until after what's called the third initiation. I will talk about the third initiation, but another time. It's a significant milestone in your spiritual development, and it happens near the end of your spiritual journey. At that time, at the spiritual initiation, that third initiation, the strength of these energies, Atma, Buddhi, and the Manas, is felt in the initiate's consciousness for the first time, and a significant achievement for the soul is achieved, as the initiate can now communicate directly with the monad. So we're not talking about that at our level yet. So you've got to go through a significant stage of at-one-ment, alignment, merging with the soul, taking your threefold nature and making it into one unit so that you see no separation in your emotions, your thoughts, or your physical expression. You're simply saying, I am acting as a soul, whatever I do. I am thinking as a soul and feeling as a soul. Everything that you do, you want to become one with. On the path of liberation, your soul will guide your lower personality for integrating and replacing the lesser expression of matter with the higher correspondence of the triad, spiritual triad, such as the Buddhi. This is a major concept to grasp. It's a major accomplishment to do. And what you're actually doing is, in meditation, remember what I said, that the higher spiritual triad is a higher correspondence of your lower triad. Your lower triad is your mental, emotional, physical nature. So what you're doing in your meditation, you're you are actually taking the soul's nature. The soul is your conduit, is your bridge, that spiritual triad. And the soul is actually taking that buddhi, or that plane of the intuition energy, and transforming your lower emotional nature so that you become more intuitive. You become more of an expression of pure love and pure awareness and pure reason. This is a major concept to grasp. So ultimately, the higher substance of these three aspects of the Atma, the Buddhi, and the Manas will replace the entire lower trinity. And when that takes place, you have major transformation in consciousness, and later you have initiation. Late in the evolution of the soul, the personality will create a bridge between the abstract mind and the higher manas, the aspect of the soul. And this will allow the intuition and pure reason to flow and bring the higher knowledge down to earth. Now, during these podcasts, in later podcasts, I will be sharing with you techniques to be able to go deep within your consciousness and then create this bridge to connect with your Buddhic, your higher Buddhi nature, your higher plane of intuition. The Atma, the Buddhi, and the Manas energies of the spiritual triad are the vehicles through which the monad connects and functions with the dense lower planes. So this is much later in the stage of evolution. And from our perspective on the lower planes, those higher energies act like a magnet which eventually draw the spiritual man to exchange the lower mental with the manas, the emotional with the buddhi, and embody the Atma, which will be the activity aspect, into the physical. These are esoteric concepts. These are out there concepts right at the moment, but you will understand more as we go along in these podcasts. Perhaps the following analogy will help to explain a little better. If you stand in front of a mirror, you will see a version of yourself, the physical form or personality. You will typically equate it with your personality, although it is part of you. It is not who you are. Although the personality is part of you, it is not the true self, just as a drop is not the ocean. If you look deeper as an observer and connect with your higher self in meditation, you can realize your consciousness is beyond just the physical identification. The Ageless Wisdom teachings instruct us to look deeper in our own consciousness, and through meditation, we learn that we connect our personality with the higher self or the soul, and we see ourselves as we really are, and we can become that. This higher identification makes it possible for the personality to integrate the higher energies of the Atma, the Buddhi, and the Manas of the spiritual triad with the energies of the lower emotional, mental, and physical bodies of our lower triad. Over time and through meditation, an integration occurs that enables initiation ultimately when the lesser man becomes the higher self. With each successive energy transference, a transformation and expansion of consciousness takes place. And this furthers the evolution of the lower vehicles or bodies. When, for example, enough Buddhic energy replaces the corresponding lower emotional self, then the aspirant, the spiritual seeker, will have inculcated the energies of intuition, pure reason, and intelligent application of love into his being. In our next podcast, we will begin a discussion about a more detailed understanding of the emotional and mental parts of ourselves.